Okay, that's enough of that. Welcome to the No Holds Barred Witchcraft podcast. Not powered by intention this week, are we?
No,
We're powered
I,
by a little something else. Something I'm not entirely sure what. I think we're powered by Tresum this week, whatever that is. But this is going to be a very obscure one because we do try on this podcast not to bring you the same old crap that you would hear everywhere else. So, with that in mind, we have taken something super obscure, which is I wouldn't say it's a TV show because it would never made it to television, did it? But you
no,
can
but
buy
it's
it on
a soap
Amazon.
opera.
It's a soap opera, that's it. You can buy it on Amazon. We're also not going to explain the a synopsis of what the storyline is because we don't want to spoil it for
Yeah,
anyone.
you're gonna have to go watch it.
We're just going to say if you imagine the 90s TV show Charmed and they made a 90s porn version of that and then halved the budget, it would be something like this.
With
It's
all those
so
season
bad
one
it's good.
filters.
Yeah, I mean, season one is only two episodes, but at least they go up to 5 episodes in season two, And then there's a season three as well. This was somewhat popular
Yeah,
at the time, and I learned a lot from it. Not magically speaking, but I learned a lot of other stuff from it. You may, if you are in the No Holds Barred Witchcraft Facebook group, you may be able to have a little look underneath the graphic for this week's podcast and see the trailer, if you dare to click on the trailer. But
I
anyway,
think you probably need to
it's about,
specify that it's not actually porn.
well, I don't know. I
It's
mean,
soft
there
porn
is no
at
real,
best. You're not going to
there's
actually
no real
see anything.
definition. There's no real definition of porn. It is one of those things that people say, I know what it is when I see it. Now, watch the trailer because in the trailer, I don't think you've quite watched the trailer that I intend to put on. But the trailer that I intend to put on that is on YouTube is somewhat graphic.
Yeah,
But before we get too far into it, it's basically in this. They don't really use the term magic; they use the term treason. Treason's like this some sort of like religion that
yeah,
predates Wicca, I believe, doesn't it?
yeah. But it's got a feeling of the PKTWs though, doesn't it? Really, it does have a bit of a post Keldon feel about it.
Oh, I don't know. I don't think that post-Keldons can trap people in mirrors and, feed upon their energy. I don't think there's an awful lot of that. I think that there is a certain men versus women kind of
Duality
somewhat.
situation going on.
Yeah, particularly there's a Dianic thing going on, I
Yeah,
think, there. But we'll go into that. So the first thing I wanted to start on is the fact that a lot of one of the main characters, who is a witch, female witch, she finds a book. She seems to have a natural ability because she can see things and then she paints, so she's an
yeah.
artist. But she finds this book and it's mostly empty, so there's not a lot in the book apart from, a strange language, and then she can make sense of the first page or so.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk about that, Chris?
Well, she's kind of like she gets these kind of prophetic dreams, doesn't she? And she's painting the history of one of the other witches. So she's kind of tapping into the stuff that had gone on in the house, hadn't she, historically? And then obviously one of the witches gets really upset because she's like, "You painted my history. You had no right." That kind of stuff.
Yeah, well, they don't know she's a witch at the start because basically it's a group of, I wouldn't say they're teenagers, but they're 20
Yeah,
somethings,
they're
aren't
like
they?
reps, aren't
All
they?
living in a, yeah,
Kind
they're
of
all
holiday
living in
reps,
this kind of, they're all
low
living in
budget.
this low budget hotel Dante that used to be I think a private estate from
Yeah,
a fairly wealthy family in this beached cove. It's kind of
one of these
what
plantation
was that?
houses,
What was
wasn't
it?
it? It's like a plantation kind of
Yeah,
house.
something like that. But yeah, it's one of those things. It's got that kind of Baywatch
It
vibe, I
does. It
suppose.
does. They're always running on the beach.
They're always running the beach with hardly any clothes on.
Yeah,
The ladies and the boys.
yeah.
And they're always covered in oil as well.
Yes, they're always.
But anyway, going back to the book, because
Yeah.
there's something very important here.
What's cool about the
So,
book is obviously that it's a teaching aid in the true sense of one, isn't it? Where she can't even she can the more she learns, the more it tells her. Like it'll literally give her like the snippets, and then like she can see the pages, she can see the stuff on the pages, can't she? But she can't
yeah,
read the words, and then kind of
it's all in like
yeah,
hieroglyphics.
and then as she unlocks stuff, it converts to English, so she can actually read the next bit and the next bit.
And it's kind of exercised based. So whereas we know a lot of people that are possibly even listening to this podcast will buy a witchcraft book with lots of exercise and lots of rituals and things like that in it, flick through it, go to the advanced section if there's such a thing in the book, and go through it.
Yeah.
Now, they don't really do anything within the book. They're theoretical magicians. So they just memorize bits and pieces and don't actually do anything. What's great about this book is you have to do the first thing and then it gives you something else to do, and each thing teaches you something, and you have to have mastered that to be able, it's the building blocks that you need to go on to the next thing. So until you get to the end of the book, you're becoming a more powerful practitioner, which it's a shame we don't have books like that. I mean, wouldn't it be brilliant if that was the case, that your little Kindle knew that you'd done the exercise before it unlocked
and then
the
releases
bit.
the next bit.
Yeah. Now, that's not the only way of learning, because rather than covens, they kind of have this almost like Star Wars Sith.
Yeah, it's very
thing,
Sith, isn't it? Master and Apprentice.
So there's what would you probably call an adept, which they use the term not aspirant,
Avatar.
don't they? So a master witch is an avatar of Tresum. So the Tresum is the energy current, the magical current that they all tap into. So a master witch would be an adept person when it comes to Tresum magic. An aspirant is essentially their apprentice, and they've got this kind of weird relationship, don't they?
Yeah, it's proper Sith. It is very kind of like master servant kind of situation, isn't it? They are their attendant, kind of in a very kind of Dianic kind of way, in that kind of supporting cupbearer situation, isn't it? Where they're there to assist whatever the
They're
needs
basically
are.
slaves.
Yeah.
They have to do whatever they're told,
Yeah.
for a little bit of morsel of information, and they're kept dumb but useful.
Yeah.
Essentially, a lot of the time, from what it seems. So the main characters within this, you've got the old characters, you've got the younger characters. The old characters, basically, there's a bit of a drama situation. The witch catches her ex cheating on her and decides to imprison him in the sub basement, I think it is,
Yeah.
isn't it, of the hotel. And then the young kids, the young people that are living in the place, end up uncovering him. She seems to have just left him there to rot for 150 odd years, kind of
Yeah.
forgot about it. And then when they unlock him, he basically is free from his chains and
obviously she doesn't realise for a
And he-
while, so he's done all sorts of
she doesn't
rubbish
realise.
by then.
Yeah. But obviously one of the young girls one of the people that live in the hotel, this main character, this witch, who comes from a line of female witches,
Yeah.
which is quite interesting because you don't find that out until later. But they have a strange kind of what you said was like a
Praying
praying
mantis.
mantis.
Yeah, once
Yeah.
you've had the man's seed, he's no longer viable, and therefore they absorb him. So they kill him and absorb him.
Yes, so they, like her mother, for example, was expected to find a magician, a magical practitioner that was a man, consummate with him, have a daughter,
Yeah.
when the daughter comes, she then kills him, and then the power supposedly flows from
It,
the father after he dies into
to
the
power the
baby.
child, yeah.
Yeah, so it's basically how they increase their power
Yeah,
through generations.
yeah.
It's not the only methods that are discussed in the series, but what are your thoughts on that, on the absorption of your parents' magical powers and aptitudes? Because there's a lot within witchcraft circles where blood and your heritage and stuff like that factors
Ancestral
into
stuff.
somehow yeah, that kind of thing. Because we don't really utilize that, do we? But it is a big deal for a lot of people.
Yeah, well, not even necessarily ancestral though, is it? Like magical lineage has slowly become a
Yeah.
more and more thing in this kind of trad witch kind of
So who initiated
who
you?
initiated you as opposed to what bloodline you're of. You know, can you trace your heritage back to Gardner? That sort of initiation-y kind of thing of whether or not your particular of whoever your kind of patriarch or matriarch of the tradition, can you trace them back to somebody who was taught by somebody who was taught
A
by
big
the
name.
original big names, yeah, and kind of like which kind of branch that you've formed off from that. And I suppose the same is kind of
Well, there was also actually what is quite relevant now, I think, is you've got particularly because this whole Norse thing's becoming quite popular,
yeah.
isn't it? And there's a very strange group of what you would probably say racist
Oh, okay.
people that say, well, if you don't have Scandinavian ancestry, then you have no business learning the runes
Yeah,
type thing.
yeah.
There's some groups like that that are out there nowadays.
And to a certain extent, in a
Um,
less racy kind of way, but there is that within the kind of Native American traditions. You need to be of the
yeah.
earth. They're kind of earth-based shamanist traditions, and therefore they feel like there should be that lineage connection, um, which you don't get in a lot of Western traditions, do you? I guess.
So what is Tresum exactly? Because it's difficult. I mean, it's referred to as a religion, but they don't ever really say magic. They always say Tresum, and
Yeah.
they evoke the powers of Tresum as well. So is Tresum some sort of god, goddess energy?
Well,
What would you say it is?
it doesn't. Although kind of like I said, like you said, it's kind of Dianic in its behaviour. There's no kind of worship involved, is there? Other than the kind of embodiment arrangement that seems to happen with the avatar seems to be the one to be worshipped, to be
So it's
submitted
kind of like
to.
the Force in
Yeah,
Star
it's
Wars.
very much kind of like that, it, but more so from the Sith kind of version of, you.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a force that's there that they can manipulate. It's kind of Star Warsy the force, isn't it? But more so from the kind of Sith that I'm more powerful because I am served, and then obviously killing off and absorbing the next one and absorbing the next one. Um, but it's the
Well, in Dante's
purity.
Cove,
It's the purity that throws me
yeah.
off. This whole kind of, you know, have a daughter who will then be the high priestess eventually, and that kind of
Well, it does kind of stick because you see this in some, particularly not so much in traditional witchcraft, but you certainly see it in some Wiccan covens where they have the man versus woman. We were part of a Christian patriarchy, so now we're gonna rebel and make a matriarchy sort of thing.
yeah,
That is a big theme in this because, of course, the family that is kind of centered around is a female line, but there is also a male line that they tried to kill off.
yeah,
You've got the moon book that the female witches have, but then there's a sun book as well
yeah,
that the male witches are supposed to have that none of the female ones can read.
yeah.
There's like
And there's
it
this,
is all quite strange.
but then there's almost a feeling of, and I don't think it actually happens, but there is a feeling of that they supposedly complete each other. There is that kind of slight
Well, they
yin
do
yang feel.
because
Don't they stick? Do they have to stick them together at some point? Or did
yeah.
I
So
imagine that?
basically, basically, there's a big foul at the end near series 3, and none of the individual practitioners are powerful enough. So the males and the females that all kind of go down these different forms of Tresum, I suppose, different energy currents, they all have to collaborate together. And there's this kind of scene where they accidentally drop the books on top of each other, and they
Yeah,
combine into a mega book that's even more powerful. So it's the combination of the sun and the moon, and that was how it was supposed to be practiced all along.
yeah, but they've been
It's just that at
split,
some point it was co-opted. Yeah,
and some kind of witch war occurred in order to separate the two sides.
because obviously you've got the point of the specific female line of witches, they kill the father and then absorb the power, but then you've also got other witches or other Tresum practitioners and that about. They've even got a Tresum council, which isn't really talked much about, but an
No,
envoy comes from
yeah,
the Tresum council because there's too much strange things going on in Dante's Cove, so
yeah,
they come to kind of investigate, and that seems to have a different system in itself as well.
yeah. They seem to be autonomous to a
Mm,
degree, don't they? It's kind of like almost like they've crossed a line, so Big Bad's going to come and tidy things back up again, and then they'll be left alone again to carry on. But the weird thing was that being able to strip their power, that was a bit odd because they don't talk about a collective power, do they? Like you see it between the Avatar and the aspirant shared power, but you don't actually see it as a collective. So how they're able to
yeah.
deny them access to the collective isn't explained, and
Well, from it's not explained, but going by from what I've seen of the having watched it, and it was like I said, quite an education watching it. You've got the fact that I think it's almost like when the baby absorbs the power as like a huge big battery, because they're always talking about batteries, aren't they?
yeah,
And whereas with the Treason Council and the Envoy, he tends to feed on others. They use a lot of sex magic in
yeah.
this, which we can talk about a little bit. Might have to wait for the Patreon to talk a bit more
After the
intimately about
watershed.
that after the watershed, but still, that's basically what happens. He continues to recharge himself
Yeah,
on various different people. And his personal choice is to go through sex magic,
yeah.
because let's be fair, this is basically porn, this series. So,
Of the
it just gives
of the
the
soft
writers a lot of
variety.
excuses of the soft variety. Well, you do see some floppy, soft things
Yeah,
on several
but you're allowed
occasions.
to in the soft variety. But yeah,
I don't know.
it's just it's just of the it's the yeah like um, they have this kind of weird marriage relationship, don't they? Like this aspirant
Hmm.
avatar thing is that it's a closed loop. And that's what he tries to introduce, isn't it, when this avatar guy arrives and said, "You haven't tried
Yeah.
all the other flavors." Um,
Yeah.
basically, is what it's essentially saying is, why are you just feeding off each other? Because surely that keeps you both weak, because there's a limit to how much power you can get between the two of you. Um, which was interesting because actually they didn't need multiple people to form any kind of
Hmm.
coven, but they did need, they were reliant on absorbing the kind of essence of people. It was all it was all very bizarre, but like I said, like there was that kind of like physical relationship as a big part of it. Again, going back to the Great Rite, the Dianics,
Oh, yeah.
you kind of can kind of get where they've pulled certain bits of um, the mythology from. You can kind of get, um, and then obviously there's also when you get to the Starflower Saint stuff, there's very much a classical feel to that too. Kind of Oedipus and the Lotus Eaters
Yeah.
kind of situation.
So with the aspirants, because obviously you have to kind of make a declaration that you offer yourself up as aspirant and as a servant to the adept, the magical practitioner.
Yeah,
And then there's like a token, isn't
yeah, they've
there?
got
So
like
in
a
exchange
token.
of
Yeah, so
So they basically get given an object which
connect.
almost binds them.
Yeah, it
Is that a
connects the two,
binding?
isn't it? Like I don't think the avatar has to wear one, but if I remember rightly, like the guys, it's like a shackle bracelet kind of situation.
Yeah,
And then with the girls, it's more like a this dainty, very pretty necklace. Um,
yeah.
but there is that kind of
So the
binding,
aspirant wears it.
yeah, as an owner, like a dog tag
Yeah,
or a dog collar, um, to kind of
a
mark
pretty
them.
one.
A very pretty one, but like really does mark them. Um, what's cool is when that starts to go the other way, though, isn't it? When kind of like the aspirant kind of tries to turn on him. Um, and that connection works both ways, and they'd clearly never thought of that before. Like it was almost like a
Well, that person, that adept's learning a different way of feeding and interacting with the energy, and their apprentice, essentially, who doesn't actually like them,
yeah.
is trying to escape and break that contract. We can talk all about contracts because we have a lot of clients with this sort of problem, actually. It's just instead of an actual person they're trying to break the link with, it's normally a spirit, isn't it? Um, but there we go. But yeah, it's quite interesting because he notices how the interaction is, and then he kind of reverses it and it
Yeah,
weakens. So it is a lot of feeding upon people's energy, vampirism
yeah.
essentially.
It's really is vampirism, and in a in the sexiest of ways. I want to kind of say it's very a 50 Shades vampirism, isn't it?
Mm, yeah. Whereas the Tresum Council, there's clearly ethics and stuff like that. Now, why isn't there a witches' council in real life? Because they did try to make one, I think, over in America at one point, but it really didn't end up very well, did it?
No.
So, why is there no structure to actual magical practice in the real world,
Well,
do you
I
think?
would argue it's because practice is so different. Like, apart from individual traditions, you could probably have a council at the top of a particular tradition, but then even that doesn't really work if you go and look at something like the Cochrane tradition, which every coven is technically practicing something completely different. They've just got the same source material, so you kind of like so I think part of it is there's no uniformity to practice, um, which is strange in some ways because I guess there are universal rules, um, if you want to call them that. But it's strange that it's never. But I think anything like that always starts. It gets too political too quickly, doesn't it? Where certain people think that the whole idea is that we all um, sing from the same song sheet, like with some kind of Catholic church. Whereas it doesn't actually work that way in practice, does it? It's so different that the only
Yeah.
hierarchical arrangement you can really have is within a coven if you choose to be part of one. Like, most people I know are solitaries. You know,
Well, I've always said it's about power. The person with the most amount of power sets the rules.
yeah,
And with the Treason Council in Dante's Cove, it's basically they see a balance, they see themselves as maintainers of the balance,
yeah,
and they'll do anything. And they do have a lot of power compared to the, so say, standard witches, standard adepts. They literally at one point banged one of them and took away their magical,
yeah.
their complete ability to practice any form of magic. Now, how would you go about doing that in the real world? Because I was going to ask you that at some
Oh, I
point.
was hoping you weren't going to ask me. Actually, I thought we'd ramble enough that you'd forget. Um, so yeah, you get it in other shows too. Like it's in The Craft. Do you remember? And they,
Yeah.
bind to you, Nancy, from doing harm. That one.
Well, that one didn't work, did it? But the other girls got banged. I
Uh,
think they lost their powers, but she she basically did it, didn't she?
yeah. So it's one of those. Oh, I don't know.
It's a common theme, I think, with these sort of TV shows.
Yeah,
It's like you either are, because they have that again in Star Wars with the whole Force severance thing. So it's the
yeah,
case of you either have the power inside you and it gets drained, or you're connecting to a greater energy and that connection is severed. Obviously, the problem with doing it in reality or real life is that most people would try to sever the connections, and that would end up killing the person.
Yeah, essentially.
So in terms of how you would stop a magical practitioner being able to do magic, when this has come up in terms of actual bindings, it depends on whether they're an adept practitioner or whether it's a beginner witch. Because a lot of
Yeah.
the time I see this sort of control mechanisms being put through poor information and that kind of thing, distractions to a certain extent with beginners.
Yeah.
Not teaching them the appropriate ways of doing something means that you have a lot of control over them. But in terms of taking a witch
And
and binding them so they couldn't do any magic whatsoever, not just have an effect on you, but no magic whatsoever, very interesting.
it would.
Interesting
It's an
concept.
interesting concept because you would essentially, you've either got to create some kind of dampening field, haven't you, that makes it extremely difficult for them to raise enough energy to do anything, or you've got to sever their connection to magic in general, which is such a complex network or tapestry of connections that how you would sever all of those would be tricky. I think it would probably be easier if you had a practitioner of a particular method that
Yeah,
only knows that method.
yeah.
Then potentially you've got ways of cutting off their access to supply, if that makes sense. So if you've got someone that is
Which, to be honest,
so
that's most
predominantly,
people do. Yeah.
if someone is predominantly into, I don't know, sea witchery and only pulls their energy
Mm.
directly from one current, you cut them off access to that current. They've either got to adapt and use a different current, which may, for someone that's been practicing, say, 30 odd years in the same field, then has to kind of relearn magic. Um, Whereas you then got
Well,
somebody,
yeah.
what we would call a professional witch that doesn't dip in just one but all pools in order to support
Well, but
other
nowadays
witches,
they're called what is it where we get called a super
super
witch
witches.
because we actually do witchcraft.
Yeah. So whereas something like that, where they've got multiple fields that they pull from, or if they, use multiple systems, I think that's the trickier one, isn't it? Is people that use multiple systems of magic. Um,
Yeah.
you have then got to cut them off from essentially the universe, which, like you said, would probably snuff them out, because you wouldn't be able to gain sustenance. So you think of some of the mechanisms that are involved in actually providing how your body absorbs energy in just to eat and power your body. If you're cutting someone off from all, how are they supposed to eat? How are they supposed to breathe? Like, you know what I mean? Like, surely that would just snuff them out.
Well, they do sell silly little binding kits and stuff like that, but they're not really designed to bind a magical practitioner and stop them from practicing magic. They're normally
Block and
supposed to
influence.
bind them from, yeah, blocking their influence over you or a given situation. Now, we can go into specific cases that we might have worked on in the past, but we are literally coming to the end of the regular podcast. So if you do stick with us on the Patreon, we will talk a little bit more about that. We'll also talk about spirit possession getting out of control, trapping people in mirrors, cursing your ex, all of that sort of thing. So if you're not on the Thoth Witchcraft Patreon, then I really do suggest it because it's bloody brilliant. I mean, I don't want to blow me a trumpet, although if I could, I'd give it a go.
Those the tangents we managed to get to do some interesting stuff on the other side of the payment line, shall we say?
I suppose we should also talk about drugs and stuff because that features heavily in Dante's Cove
Oh yeah, riding
as
the
well.
hedge.
Riding the Hedge or Saint or was it Starflower?
Starflower.